Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Bryan. Very much the support act in this situation. It's my great privilege to introduce Nick Ashley from Tesco Media and Insight Platform. I'll be gently interrogating him in a moment. I think the first thing for me to ask you is just to give us all a very quick overview about what Tesco have been up to in the recent past in terms of developing what I'd certainly regard as a market-leading in-store digital infrastructure.
Great. So shall I do my quick 10-minute presentation and then we'll go from there. Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me along. I want to talk about why I think the connected store is the next frontier of retail media. So we have 6 times the amount of digital touchpoints in our stores than we did this time last year. So that's over 3,000 digital touchpoints in store. And as was touched on in the last panel, huge capital investment in order to make that a reality. Operational challenges and a team, of which many are here, hello Connor, making that a reality across the business. So why did we decide to do that? We could have said no. I could have thought we've got much better things to do. But actually we decided to do that, and there were lots of reasons why. So I'm going to give you a bit of a story about why we did that and why we decided to invest, and some of the benefits that we've got, and we're still trialling and we're still learning. But also give you a bit of a context about the Tesco Media and Insight Platform, which I'll start off with. So we think that for a brand, retail media gives, specifically Tesco Retail Media, gives them a huge opportunity to shape what Britain buys. So if you're successful in Tesco, then largely a brand will be pretty successful. So it's important that retail media is considered as an investment, not as a tax, as an investment in order to drive growth in that particular environment. So we talk about helping brands shape what Britain buys, and we do that through 3 different ways. So the first one is Tesco Scale, and with scale brings both reach and representation. So anyone who's planned media in their career will know that reach is critical. Tesco has 36% share of online grocery. It has nearly 3,000 stores. It has 22 million active Clubcard householders, which gives incredible data for us to work from. So it gives great scale, but it's not just about reach. It's also about representation. So representation from a diverse suite of communities up and down the country, which I think gives brands, whatever their size, whatever their priority, an opportunity to talk to different communities up and down the land. Second area is obviously data. And of those 22 million households that I just talked about, since we launched Clubcard prices in 2019, use of Clubcard has gone through the roof. So in large stores, about 85% of all transactions are accompanied with a Clubcard. In express stores, it's about 62%, which is considerably up from where it used to be. So the volume of data that we have, the frequency of data that we have, allows us to create amazing, actionable insights. I spent most of my career as a planner at WPP, media agencies, and you'd spend weeks planning your audience and doing lots and lots of insight work, and then you'd go and buy that audience through the media owners, and all of that great work would be lost because you'd be buying 16th for adults or house persons or something like that. Retail media has totally changed that. So not only can you create an amazing audience through brilliant data, you can also reach that audience through the network. So I think that's really critical, and it's why in our world anyway, we're having conversations with people way beyond shopper marketing as a consequence. And finally, measurement and effectiveness. So as we all know, it's critical that we demonstrate return on investment. I think retail media sometimes does itself down by focusing on ROAS and focusing on the short term. Whilst that's critical, I think the connected store does have a role to play here. I think it has a really important role to play in brand awareness, brand consideration, brand perception. And it's important that we recognise that. So let's talk about in-store. It's clearly in vogue. Consumers are flocking to stores. So, whilst we have a huge e-commerce business, 85% of all our transactions still take place in store. So if a brand is going to be successful, they need to be successful in the Tesco store environment. We also know that our customers like to be inspired in that particular environment. and are willing to make decisions based on what they're seeing, whether that be a promotion they're unaware of, whether that be a food recipe idea, whether that be a category they've never tried before, whether that be a new piece of MPD. 85% of customers are looking to be influenced whilst they're in the in-store environment. And through that huge growth of digital touchpoints that I've talked through, we can inspire at scale. So over 6 million customers are exposed to our digital touchpoints on a weekly basis. And we talk about the connected store, and we're trying increasingly to connect the different touchpoints that we've got within the store environment and think about it as a connected customer journey. And with that, we're introducing new technology into store, which allows brands more flexibility, more adaptability. So good examples of that are obviously the screens, but also scan as you shop devices, which I'll come and talk to you about later, where brands can advertise in that particular environment, really bringing digital media principles into the store environment. Increasingly personalised experiences. So the amount of app usage in store is phenomenal and perhaps unexpected, which allows you to support individual personalised promotions in that environment. Scan as you shop is another one where you scan your club card as soon as you go into store and use that device. 1 in 8 of all transactions are accompanied with a scan as you shop device, so it's massive. So therefore, personalised messaging can be served to you. And over time, our journey will be even more interesting based on location and what you've already added into your basket. And finally, I think we'll probably talk about this a bit later, Bryan, hopefully, is online and offline integration. So genuine omni-channel presence. How does in-store activity impact online and vice versa? And as a consequence, we think that the connected store, clearly, it predominantly delivers in that grey bucket there. It's a very similar chart to one we just saw a minute ago in terms of purchase. And that's always going to be where people predominantly look to see conversion and sales. But I do not think it only operates there. And I think we need to really push ourselves as an industry to see where we're driving other performance metrics. So that could be priming customers, that could be delivering awareness, that could be looking at shifting attitudes. And I think certain formats allow you to do that in different ways, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's also about prompting. So it might be a piece of recipe content in a store which is prompting someone to think about a different meal choice that particular evening, rather than a particular promotion that's running. And then obviously all the way through to purchase and protect. Measurement was talked about a lot in the last panel, and clearly it's critical. So we always run robust sort of test and control plans for our clients, so we can look at controlled and exposed for all of our activity. So that allows us, and I'll show you some data in a second, allows us to look at sales uplift for particular products that are advertised or a brand rather than just the products. Allows us to look at new customers to the category, which is really important for both Tesco and for most CPG brands, and allows us to look at return on ad spend. But increasingly, we're being asked, I think rightly, well, what's your reach, what's your impressions, what's the CPM, tell me more about the demographics of exposure. So in terms of our journey, so some of the things that we've done, so we've seen huge changes over the last 2 or 3 years in a really positive, constructive way. So pre-2020, everyone talks about retail media as if it didn't exist before 2020, don't they? But it existed, and we had lots of in-store activity through point of sale, through experiential, through sampling, through smart screens. So we had a long partnership with JC&Co, 10th year just passed. But over the last 3 years, we've really tried to digitize the in-store environment. So what have we done? So in 2021, in the height of the pandemic, we launched in-store radio. And we didn't launch it as an advertising medium in its first place. We launched it because we wanted a centralized tannoy system in order for our colleagues to be able to speak to customers about safety and security. Only then did we think, because we didn't do that before, people had to go onto a tannoy and speak individually. So we had a centralized tannoy system, which was great. Then introduced music. I hear radio was talked about earlier this morning. Then introduced music, which our colleagues loved whilst they were in store. And only then started our own advertising and then started to sell it to brands. So it's an interesting journey, actually, that we didn't think we want to launch an advertising network for radio. We thought of customer first and then went out. In summer 2022, we spent a lot of time with our exec, and we spent a lot of time with our exec building the business cases that we talked about a minute ago, in order to think about how we build a connected store network. It is not cheap, and you need to do it with your eyes very wide open, particularly if you want a quality digital network, I would say. So the right questions were being asked, and we pulled together a 5-year business case to invest. And in March 2023, we started the Digital Screen Network. So we had 2 formats that we launched with. So something called a goalpost, big screen, category agnostic, visible throughout pretty much all of the store, and then 2 gondola ends. We started off on gondola ends as portrait, and actually ended up changing it to landscape. So to the point about D6s. D6s didn't work for us. We shifted it around, and we saw much better results as a consequence of that. At the same time, and we have the product manager in the team, so Nick's over there if you want to grab him later. We launched Scan As You Shop. So I'm so excited about the opportunity this potentially brings us, because it really does bring digital media into the store environment. So it's personalised, it will be location-based, and it will be based on your purchases at the individual time of your shop. So imagine the opportunities that brings brands. So really excited about that. We've then ramped up our presence in Express. So we've got screens in the kiosks, and expanding our connected store network across different categories. There are certain categories that we're not active in, that we know there's quite big demand for, but it's practically quite difficult to make happen. So we're working through, you can guess what that might be. So we're working through how that would work. And so there's been huge development. And then only a month or so ago, we launched our first big non-endemic partnership with Vauxhall. So you may have seen that most retailers started to charge their customers for the use of electric car charging. Vauxhall now sponsor that whole opportunity with a digital integrated screen, and we'll take it beyond that. There'll be more use of that moving forward. So big breadth of opportunities. And as a result of that, we've gone from 523 screens to 3,035. That excludes the 500 screens we've also got with JC&Co, so 3,500, and we're not stopped yet. So advertising is one part of it, but we've also been assessing other benefits of the screen network. Some of it actually is feedback from store managers, and most of our store managers love it, and they love it for 2 or 3 reasons. One, they've got less point of sale to put up, so there's less operational potential challenges that might go wrong. 2, they think it looks brilliant, so the quality of their store environment is improved. And thirdly, they see really good results from the brands that are advertising it. So it's a great feedback from store managers. And then we obviously also assess things from not just from a brand perspective, but from a category uplift perspective. And the categories where we're seeing, where we have screens, we're seeing really good sales uplifts. And there's some of the formats there. So over the last few months, we've delivered over 2 billion impressions to give you some sort of sense of the scale within that environment. And then before I go on to Bryan, just a couple of stats on results. This is from 178 different campaigns that have been assessed so far. So the average increase of the specific product that we're advertising on the screens has been 7%. That's just within the campaign period. But there's also an impact on broader brand. So usually it's a SKU that someone's talking about, but broader brand will say a 4% increase. So, but the variance has been significant. So in the beer category, for example, we have 2 examples of where that 7% is actually 65%. And we have a confectioner during Easter where it was 93% versus the year before. So some of the results are absolutely phenomenal that we're seeing. So really excited. I can't tell you too much about what's coming next, but I think you'll see from the pace of change that we've put in over the last year, we're really committed to support it and give brands, agencies, new opportunities to talk to their customers in store. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Nick. Now it's time for your
Grilling.
Paxman-style grilling. So I think we'll probably touch on quite a few things we've already discussed during the course of the day. And the first one I'd like to talk about is structure and alignment. We've heard that across both retailers and brands. But from a Tesco perspective, what have been the implications of developing this hugely impressive retail media network on how you think differently about silos and internal alignment?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. So Tesco rather than the CPGs?
Yeah, Tesco to start with.
Tesco to start with. I think it's a really good question, and it's complicated. So it's not like, being a retail media network is not like being a normal media owner. Because the reality is that the primary job of Tesco is to serve customers and to sell food, right? Stating the obvious. So we haven't set up an official JV, but we've basically set up a business unit between Tesco and Dunnhumby, which consists of all the relevant people that you would expect to be part of that process. So the Tesco customer marketing team is critical. And the reason they're critical is because the customer is the most important person in all of this. So we don't want to sell advertising just because we can. We want to ensure that the touch points are right for our customers and we're serving relevant and personalised messages as a result. So they're in it. The UX teams are in it, whether that be the in-store design team, whether that be the UX team for .com and app. And they are absolutely critical because at the end of the day, the customer journey through those different channels is critical. Obviously, the commercial teams are part of it because they've got their broader relationships with the CPG brands. And then Dunnhumby. And then Dunnhumby's changed significantly in terms of the types of talent that it has. So we've been attracting digital media talent, agency-focused talent, in order to try and broaden the conversations that we're having as a result. So really radical change. And that sounds easy, but it's really hard to implement. And without, I suppose there are two things that are really critical. One is that Ken Murphy, our CEO, it's one of his 3 key strategic priorities. So that's good. But also that everyone has shared OKRs, which is really important because otherwise you've got people in different directions, which I think perhaps when it wasn't at that level of strategic importance, people might have had a bit.
And I suppose flipping that on its head, looking at it from a brand or supplier perspective, is from a Tesco perspective, what would good look like there? Would it be, we've heard already today about cross-functional partnerships, would it be more of a kind of a single entity you'd be hoping to deal with?
Yeah. I think this is probably the question we get asked about the most. And I think it's a period of massive transformation for most CPG advertisers, I would say. So I would start with how I think communication works. And we're really good, aren't we, in marketing about pigeonholing stuff. So we say, right, here's my brand activity, and here's my e-com performance activity. And we all know that even the most brandy piece of brand advertising is going to have some sort of impact on sales. And even the most, what's the word I was going to say, aggressive, assertive sales driving activity is going to have an impact on brand. So it's important that you look at it that way. So what we're finding is that, and often it's with our help, is that CPGs are connecting teams together in order to have this sort of conversation. And they're not all doing it in the same way, but many of them have global retail media centres of excellence, for example, which might set principles for different markets, seeing that a lot. I'm seeing the role of the heads of media, so the job that I used to do at Tesco, but the heads of media jobs at CPGs is changing significantly, and they're almost connecting internal teams. So, we'll be in meetings with the head of media, helping direct e-com and shopper and brand. And that is happening more and more and more. And I think until that happens, you're never going to get an integrated and cohesive plan. But it's super exciting because I think it's genuine proof that people are recognising that retail media has a role to play across the whole funnel, not just at the bottom.
I suppose an obvious follow-up question is who should be paying for stuff? So I've heard, I've seen a kind of framework recently where, in-store should be coming out of a shopper marketing budget. on-site should be coming out of a national brand budget. I mean, do you have a perspective on either the current state of play or where we might be heading in terms of that kind of budgetary realignment from CPGs?
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, it's one budget. That's so much harder to do than actually say. But I would encourage the CPGs to do that as much as possible. I think you have to link it to the broader commercial plan. So if a CPG has an ambition to grow its business by 50% over the next 3 years, then media should be considered as an investment in order to help drive that across those different forces. When it comes to execution and planning, 100% you need those specialisms. So absolutely you need the specialist shopper team to help install. You probably need an agency to work on off-site. So our proposition on off-site is it helps you sharpen your brand budget because you're targeting an audience that you really want to target. Yep. I think obviously you've got e-com as well. So those specialisms are absolutely critical. But I think equally, each acknowledging that they all have an influence on each other.
So probably I'm anxious to open it up to the floor. So final one from me is, I know today is largely about in-store, but legend has it that activating online on Tesco.com is as important for in-store behaviours as it is for online transactions. Do you have any insight around the importance of having that kind of activation all the way through the entire ecosystem?
Yeah, I'll give you some stats on that. So web and app traffic is 182% higher than it was pre-COVID. So that's 3 times higher, almost, than it was. So it gives you some sort of sense of how the scale. Over half of Clubcard householders use it through the app, not through the card. So it's an increasingly digitised base. We have 9.3 million people who use the app but never shop online.
So it's more of a kind of inspiration research piece.
And then we have, so the latest data we've got is we've got 1.5 million people who are clearly going online for inspiration, for checking prices, for looking to see what the latest promotions are, and then they're going in store within 72 hours. So that's 1.5 million people actively doing that time and time again. And it happens in categories like beer, wines and spirits a lot, which obviously high price point. Happens in health and beauty a lot. So it does vary by category, but we're seeing it a lot. And it's another reason why, I think the economy has also helped drive that, particularly from a price checking perspective. It's another reason why Scan As You Shop has been so successful, that people use it to budget as they're going around the store. So it plays a really important role. And I think as grocers, it's really important that we stress that omni-channel presence that we've got, and how different channels operate together, because not everyone can offer that, can they?
Indeed. I could drone on for hours, so I'm more than happy to open it up to questions from everybody else.
Hi Nick, you're right.
Hi.
Out of the CPGs that you're working with, you've obviously talked about trying to get them to merge maybe their shopper and brand teams all in one. What brands would you say are doing that really well at the moment?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples if that's all right. So I think L'Oreal are doing a good job. And the reason I think they're doing a really good job is they are very data oriented. So the work that we did with them was propensity-based modelling. So health and beauty is an interesting category for Tesco. 40% of Tesco customers shop health and beauty. Every other category it's 70% plus. So it's clearly in Tesco's interest and L'Oreal's interest to grow that. So with them, pretty much all of the work was identifying the audience that aren't currently shopping health and beauty, but are showing every inclination that they should be, and are probably shopping elsewhere. And we worked with them to develop a specific audience and targeted them. So that was really, really good work. Heineken's another good example, where they launched Cruz Campo last year, Spanish lager, exclusively to Tesco. All of their media spend came through Tesco, through us. Now, that did not mean that they didn't have TV on the plan, or social on the plan, or programmatic on the plan, as well as all of the retail media activity. but it was fueled by what we felt and agreed with them was the most appropriate audience to go after. So all of that can happen. I think that was a really brave move from them, and I mean that was specifically led by a head of media at Heineken, who's someone who was very data-driven and unlocked the opportunity. It felt they could unlock the opportunity. I think Diageo have just appointed a global head of retail media. Unilever have got a centre of excellence, so everyone's moving in the right direction, I think. But a couple of really good examples there where I think the more time that is spent planning and properly addressing the business challenges rather than activating a trade plan, the better that everyone's going to work together.
That was great, thank you. Two-pronged question. Have you seen any incremental investment through the digitalisation of your screens? And then second to that would be, what's your strategy with digitalisation of screens and merchandising? Specifically, I've seen, the goalposts and then also the gondola ends. I'd love to just understand how that works.
Yeah, it's certainly not all incremental, absolutely not. And I think people have switched some money from what they typically would have spent in cardboard point of sale into digital screens, definitely. But they're probably seeing better results and will continue to invest more and more and more. So having said that, we've got several conversations with agencies who clearly see the brand awareness opportunity as much as the in-store opportunity for certain formats. So there's been, I mean, the growth has been phenomenal. It's one of the fastest growing areas of the business, but it's not all incremental. On the second question, it's an interesting question. So gondola ends, our ideal situation is it is fully merchandised. So, which is really interesting. So to the points that were made earlier, it's not the same as a normal outdoor buy, which is what makes it complicated for people. But we don't always do that. So we're increasingly doing cross-category opportunities. So for example, Alpro might advertise on the cereal aisle. So we'll always give the opportunity to the brand that is merchandised first or foremost. If for whatever reason they decide it's not right at that time, then we'll move on. But that's on the gondola ends. The goalposts are a totally different scenario. So the goalposts are, if you've been in one of the Tesco stores that have them, they're super visible. And whilst they do work really well, if stuff is merchandised underneath them, they don't have to work in that way. So they're often used by brands in less visited parts of the store, for example. So the lottery have used them in order to direct people. So we're trying to produce different formats that work for different needs and different opportunities, I think. And then Scan as you shop, we've opened up to payment partners, for example. So Visa, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, etc. can now use that particular format. So we're trying to we'll always be led by what we think is right for the customer, but there are definitely opportunities which are beyond just putting it next to merchandise brands.
It's got time for one final question.
Nick, I'm really interested, given that you've obviously spent a long time on traditional media buying and that world is clearly showing a lot of interest in retail media. And I wondered, to the extent that you're putting new types of inventory in, I couldn't see them being very interested in traditional static, but how you intend to go about that. Would it be to the traditional out-of-home agencies? Would it be to traditional digital buyers or separate units of major agencies? And how do you see them responding? Because obviously Tesco's a huge audience.
Yeah.
And you're a huge media buyer, so I imagine you talk to your own agency. But I'm just interested in how you see that world adapting to what you're developing.
It's a brilliant question. I mean, that's where I spent my whole life before, so I'm particularly interested in it. I think they're finding their way, if I'm honest. But there's been some great moves. I mean, Omnicom bought Flywheel, as we know. Publicis, all of their different assets are fantastic. So look, they are definitely gearing up for it. So I'd say a couple of things. I think number one, the agency can play a really important planning role. Because they've got sight of the total marketing and media plan. And we need to think about how retail media operates within that overall plan. So that's the first thing that I think they can do. I then think there are specific opportunities for each individual, proposition that we've got. So off-site is clearly something that agencies will focus on. So how do I'm launching a new brand. How do I target people who I know are going to switch in the category using Tesco Clubcard data rather than just buy a generic buy on VOD? I think is really interesting and is changing the game a little bit with those people. I think the outdoor specialists are starting to show quite a lot of interest in, they will obviously do through the decode stuff, but through the install opportunity, but there's a bit of an education job required on the merchandising point and how it needs to work together, and it's not a simple buy as perhaps a roadside 6-sheet might be. And I think, obviously .com, so a lot of people use agencies for their e-commerce activity, so for performance media, so they're playing a really important role there. So in terms of, I won't tell you the percentages, but in terms of percentage of our overall revenue, it's growing. And we've got pretty big expectations that it will continue to grow because I think clients see the value that they can bring in looking at the broader picture.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.